Okay, so when I started my career right out of graduate school, I worked at a recording studio, and it was an up and coming studio in Detroit, Michigan, owned by Fred Hammond. It was a great little studio. Anyway, a lot of my creative heroes found their way there because it's a friend community, and it was a great place to work and just a really cool place to hang out. So, artists, songwriters, musicians, I met a lot of people that I had been fans of from a distance for, my whole life. At that same time, I was a member of a church in the area, pastored by Reginald M. Lane. He is my spiritual father, now in heaven, but his life continues to impact me. And during that time, our church was filled with creative heroes, songwriters, artists, musicians, but also people who would come to visit our church, not just because they were national recording artists who were booked to be with us, but because Pastor Lane had a really revelational word in his mouth for something he called the anointing of the psalmist. It was a way in which he was talking about and to national recording artists and musicians and creatives that I had never heard in an organized church before. And so it drew people who operated in those gifts. It was a really great time to be working in a place like that and going to that kind of church. But as a result, I started to notice certain things about how God works through the gift of the psalmist or the anointing of the psalmist. And I started to notice something that I'm going to call, for our purposes, graces, different graces. I don't want to dive too deeply into that. Let's just agree to call it graces. And so for some people that operated creatively, their grace was local. They were really, really applauded in the local body. They could do things in the community. They were the hottest this and the biggest that in the area where we lived. But outside of that area, when I would go back home to visit or ask friends who lived in other cities, do you know about so and so? They would never know about so and so. A local grace. And then there were some people who had what I'm going to call a regional grace over their gift, where they were big in the local city, big in the local community, but also big in the tri-state area, or big in the 5-state square area, big on the East Coast. They had a regional grace. They could extend their influence just a little bit further, and they were known and effective. And then, of course, there was something I was more used to, national grace, national recording artists, national touring musicians, people who would travel all over the country, and most of them pursued it professionally, and they were really effective everywhere. Everybody knew who they were. Now, you might say to yourself, but that's just a cheap way of saying some people make it and some people don't. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about effectiveness. And what really made this click for me is when I saw national recording artists who came to our church not to perform or minister, not because our church booked them, but just came to visit or were members of our church. When they would participate locally, when they would use their gifts locally, it just wasn't that effective. And it wasn't that they were having a bad day. Their grace was national. And in the local body, there just wasn't that same kind of overflow. That made me start to pay attention, to ask questions, to look at other examples of this. And I now believe there are just graces. There's a local grace, there's a regional grace, there's a national grace. There's something new too, a global grace. And we'll talk about that another time. But the reason why I mention this is because I do believe God works with us specific graces for his specific calling for us, the specific way we've been designed. And if we operate within that grace, there is nothing that we think to do or touch or any place that we think to be where doors won't open and where resource won't be there for us. But when we operate outside of that grace, we're often frustrated. A local artist who's trying to be national, or a national artist who's trying to hide locally, frustration. A regional artist who's trying to be national, or a regional artist who's trying to hide locally, frustration. But when they accept, this is how I'm designed. When we accept, this is how I'm designed. Resource, opportunity, open doors, connectivity. Networking doesn't have to be a matter of effort. People come to you. In my own life, I've found that to be true. Many times, it has been more comfortable to me to remain local. But early in my adult life, here's something you shouldn't share every place, but I'm going to share it with you. I received a prophetic word that God was calling me to have a broad-based impact. Had no idea what that meant, but it has proven to be true, and it has nothing to do with my comfort level. Even without trying, my impact goes broad. The grace on my life is broad. The grace on my gift is a broad grace. Now, having said that, it doesn't make me better than anybody else. It's not about achieving competitively. It is about understanding who you are and with intentionality and strategy being rightly fit. Anyhow, local, regional, national, which one are you?